Welcome, witches, wizards, and muggles alike, to another enchanting episode of Magical Tales from the Slytherin Common Room, bringing your favorite Harry Potter fanfiction to audio format. So sit back, relax, and Accio headphones, and let the magic begin.
Apostasy by Deydralinne, Chapter 35, An Estimated Guess. The Sequana Magical Medical Hospital was quieter and cleaner than she could ever remember St. Mungo's being. It had a soft, peaceful glow of sunlight permanently filtering in. It was pitch black outside, but inside it felt like a warm summer afternoon. It was relaxing, which she supposed was the reason for the enchantment. Renaud rushed in seconds after they had arrived, nearly crushed Hermione in a bear hug, and then disappeared into a private treatment room. Hermione had wanted to hang around just in case and make sure he was okay, but they had to be at Riddle Manor that night for dinner. One of Renaud's guards had seen them getting ready to depart and had stopped her. Draco had translated for her. Apparently, he was Louis's little brother. Their mother had been beside herself, convinced that Louis was dead, and that if there was anything that they could do for her, not to hesitate to reach out. Hermione had returned to the chateau to find that Astoria was already dressed in a shining silver-beaded gown with her hair pulled back into a tight bun. Daphne, Pansy, and Theo had left a few minutes before her and the others. It had seemed they had also gotten ready. Theo in a dress shirt and pants with a silvery gray vest to match Astoria's dress. Daphne in a black one-piece suit with a plunging neckline, and Pansy in a plain black floor-length gown with a Queen Anne collar. The latter appeared the most bored by the notion of dinner with her boss as she lounged around flicking through a newspaper. "So it's like a formal affair then?" Hermione eyed them all with a level of amazement. They had all gotten ready so quickly, but she didn't know how to do that, as she had not grown up with the fancy formal dinners and galas every other week. "I've already hung a dress on your door for you, Hermione," Astoria smiled at her sweetly. "Draco, all black, please," she added before disappearing down the hallway. Hermione's dress was long, black, covered entirely in lace and sheer in places. The slit that ran up one side was so high that she was sure if she moved the wrong way, people would get an eyeful. But she put it on anyway. She brushed out her hair, letting it fall loose around her shoulders, and smeared on a thin layer of lipstick. Ginny was just stepping out of her room at the same time as Hermione. Though she had spent every night sleeping in Blaze's room since the night she and Blaze had married, it seemed that she had yet to move her clothes. Ginny looked Hermione up and down and let out a long, slow whistle. "Damn, girl," she grinned. Hermione rolled her eyes and eyed Ginny's knee-length, long-sleeved, glittering gold dinner dress. "Damn yourself. Have you seen those legs? Ladies, let's go. We're going to be late," Blaze shouted up the stairs at them. "We're the guests of honor. We can't be late. Everyone else is just early," Ginny shouted back. As it turns out, they could be late. While the dinner was in celebration of them, the host was Tom Riddle, and the other guests were Death Eaters. So when they were shown into the formal dining room, everyone was already seated. Not that Tom was present yet, but some of the other guests didn't seem too thrilled to be here or to be waiting. Adrian Pusey gave her a reassuring nod as Draco's hand, warmed against her back, guided her to a chair next to his, pulling it out for her and tucking it in gently behind her. Hermione let her eyes wander and come face to face with Lucius Malfoy, sitting directly opposite her. The man did indeed look ill. He had never carried much muscle on him anyway, but he seemed nearly skeletal. His eyes were glossy, his breathing labored, his hair thin and stringy, and his cheeks sunken in. Despite his obvious ailment, his eyes narrowed on her and flew to his son in bewilderment. He was wise enough to keep his opinions to himself, though, and Hermione shifted anxiously as Draco sat next to her. Narcissa tilted her head in observation next to her husband, her mouth pulled into a thin line. "Draco, aren't you going to introduce us to your new friend?" Narcissa asked stiffly. Hermione's stomach clenched in anticipation, thankful for the presence of Ginny and Blaze on Draco's other side, Astoria and Theo next to her, and Daphne and Pansy on the other side of them. Draco didn't even hesitate. "Mother, don't play coy. You know who Hermione Granger is. But if you insist on these games, Mother, Father, Hermione Granger, Hermione, my mother, Narcissa, and my father, Lucius. Though I doubt you will hear much out of my father. He trailed off in a mumble. Pleasure, Hermione smiled politely toward them. Narcissa offered a tight, forced smile in return, and Lucius just glared silently. Hermione hadn't known that Draco's parents would be here. If she had, she probably would have argued for a different dress. Not that it would have mattered. Hermione imagined that they would still dislike her no matter what she wore. She could feel the blush flooding her cheeks as Lucius continued to stare at her. Father, Draco growled in warning. Lucius dropped his eyes away from her to the plate in front of him. Narcissa shifted her gaze to Ginny, eyeing her with the same distaste with which she had eyed Hermione. Blaise, I hear you have married. Congratulations. Silence fell thick and tense over the dining room while everyone awkwardly sipped at their drinks. It became more and more uncomfortable as each second ticked by on the grandfather clock in the corner. Eventually, Hermione couldn't take it anymore. She could, in a way, see why Narcissa and Lucius were less than thrilled to see her in supposedly intimate company with their son. But really, she had no reason to shy away from being here, so she smiled at Adrian across the table. Pusey, how did your men get on today? Adrian opened his mouth to answer her with a sympathetic smile when Tiberius snorted into his glass of whiskey in disgust. Something amusing, not? A Death Eater Hermione recognized as the other Lestrange brothers sneered in his direction. No love was lost between those two, it seemed. Not at all, Tiberius, clearly already intoxicated, chuckled. Actually, just counting my blessings. My son might have chosen a defect cunt to take his wife, but at least she is a pureblood, even if she will be dead soon. And knows how to be civilized at a formal dinner, not like Malfoy's not like Malfoy's mudblood bitch. The elder knot seemed unbothered by everyone's open mouths and wide eyes staring his way in shock, swallowing down the rest of his drink bitterly. Everyone moved at once. Theo was up, stepping on his chair with one foot on the table, ready to pounce for his father's jugular. The fuck did you just say about my wife? His face twisted into a quiet storm. Astoria squealed and leapt back up and away from the table, Pansy following and shielding her from the chaos now ensuing. Daphne, Draco, and Ginny were all on their feet with their wands pointed at the man's throat, the tip of their wands all glowing green, and Blaise was gearing up to punch the man in the jaw. Enough, Tom roared as he entered the room from the shadows. Everyone halted, but did not retreat at all. Tiberius, Tom tutted, this is not how we treat our guests. Tiberius scoffed and snapped his fingers for the elf to pour him another glass of whiskey. Apologies to you, my lord, though his tone lacked any remorse. Not to me, Tom eyed the man with calculation, apologized to Hermione. Tiberius paused, swallowed down his drink, and snatched the decanter from the trembling creature. You cannot be serious, he mumbled, pouring himself a glass he did not need. Did I stutter? Tom growled, his anger at Tiberius's disobedience rising. Shall I assume that you are also fucking her? It is the only justification I can think of for how she waltzed in here and put everyone on such a short fucking leash. Perhaps the golden girl has a golden cunt? Tom's wand pointed at the man at the other end of the table. Tom, Hermione commanded quietly from her position, still seated, and gave him a shake of her head. Everyone sit down. Nobody moved for a second, reluctantly. Ginny was the first to sit down, tugging Blaise down with her. Theo still had one foot on the table, leaning toward his father and ready to pounce. You are a dead man, Theo hissed. A fucking dead man, you hear? Theodore, sit down right now, Hermione demanded again, firmer. Yes, son, you wouldn't want to upset your new leader, Tiberius glared. Leading us into a new world. All right, by whipping out your existing one. Having us mingle with fucking trash. Tiberius ended his rant in a roar, his hands coming out and swiping the plates and glasses, with the exception of his own, anything within his reach, to a deafening crash to the ground. No one said a word as Hermione's eyes narrowed. 60 years, Tom. For 60 years, you and I have been friends. And for what? Her fingers wrapped around her wine glass in hand, sipping it delicately. The elf in the corner moved forward to clean up the shattered silverware, but Hermione held up her hand to stop it. She stared at Draco until he sighed and sunk back into his chair. Her eyes moved to Theodore, who glowered back at her. He has no right, Hermione shussed her friend. He is shit-talking for the hell of it, and karma will come his way soon enough. Hermione soothed. Slowly but reluctantly, he removed his foot from the table and stepped down off of the chair, his hand extending out to Astoria, who stepped up to him and let him help her back into her chair. Pansy following suit without needing prompting. Daphne was pissed off at having to stand down, that much was clear, but she sat all the same, refusing to look at Hermione, or anyone else for that matter, just glaring down at her place setting. Hermione sighed and raised her eyebrows at Tom, who lowered his wand but did not move, his eyes more furious than Hermione had seen them in some time. "Tom, please sit," Hermione asked sweetly. Tom fiddled with the button on his suit jacket and stomped to his chair, huffing in annoyance as he sat. Hermione waited until he had taken his place at the head of the table before casting the reparo on the shattered plates and glasses on the floor, levitating them back into position in front of Tiberius, who snarled with disgust. "If you think I will be eating off plates that have been on the dirty fucking floor, girly, you're out of your damn mind." Hermione shook her head and placed her glass back on the table casually. "You'll be dead by then, so really, it won't matter," she answered nonchalantly, waving him off without so much as a glance his way. Silence fell over the table again, and all eyes shifted to her. Every single person in this room was staring at her. She hadn't mentioned the plan to anyone. The only being in this room who knew the truth was the elf in the corner. Not that one person had noticed yet that it was their Gimli, not one of Tom's elves. "Thank you, Gimli. You may leave now," Hermione sighed, finally looking up at the table surrounding her. Her housemates looked at the elf in a mixture of confusion and recognition. "Did you just threaten me?" Tiberius smirked her way. Hermione rolled her eyes. Why did everyone think she was threatening them? She had issued Tiberius with one warning. He had fucked around and not listened, and now he would be facing the consequences of his actions because Hermione did not like repeating herself. What a waste of her time that was. I was merely stating facts. Beside her, Draco was staring at the whiskey glass making its way to Tiberius's lips. The only thing to have survived his earlier tantrum. She ignored the burn of Tiberius glaring at her until he had finished the last drop of his drink. It was only then she looked at him and smiled sweetly. "Did you not notice that you were the only one to get whiskey this evening, Tibbs?" Tiberius frowned, his eyes searching the table to confirm that everyone else had indeed been drinking wine. His rage turned his face an ugly, blotchy purple. "You bitch," he sputtered. "Give me the antidote right now, you horrid little—" Hermione was quicker than him. The moment the old bastard's hand flexed, she shouted, "Expelliarmus," and wagged her finger at him while Draco instinctively caught the man's wand. "I don't think so. I crafted that especially for you. I won't have you ruin my surprise by offing yourself on a rebound curse. You will see soon enough anyway. In the meantime, I think we have had enough of your outdated judgments. Silencio." Tiberius slammed backwards in his chair, stiff and unable to move despite his attempts. His lips moved aggressively, no doubt shouting slurs her way, but not a sound was made from his lips. "Right. Apologies, everyone. That was quite the disruption." She was met with more silence as everyone tried to recover from the surprise of Hermione's actions. "The whiskey?" Tom finally asked in fascination. Hermione smiled in response. "Poisoned? I'm rather interested to see how it goes. Should be soon, I hope. I would hate to delay your dinner further, Tom." When no one said a word and continued to look at her in horror and/or admiration, she decided to shift the focus back to the purpose of the evening. "So, you two have been married for a long time now. What would you say is the secret to a long, happy marriage? Any advice for the happy couple?" She smiled at Draco's mother and father politely and nodded her head in the direction of Ginny and Blaise. Draco laughed beside her, slow and quiet at first, building in volume and intensity until the sound was echoing around the room. Their housemates added to the chorus of the noise in Hermione's confusion. "I don't see what's so funny. It was a genuine question." She looked around at them, not understanding what she had said to make them all react in such a way. I believe it has more to do with the way that you have announced that you are, as we speak, killing one of our oldest friends with as much casualty as discussing the weather, only to disregard it and return to small talk, dear. Narcissa sighed, pointing out the obvious before taking a sip of her wine. We are all seasoned killers here, are we not? One pitiful man's imminent death should hardly warrant an in-depth conversation. Not when there is something more worthy of talking about. It is apparently rude for me to discuss work at the table. It is also considered rude to seek marital advice from the couple who has been married the longest here. Narcissa looked at her in an amused disbelief. No, Miss Granger, it is not. Never go to bed angry at one another, and if you do, make sure it is resolved before getting up in the morning. It will do no one any good to take it into the new day with you. Narcissa offered, finishing by falling back into her chair with her lips pursed. Like so many before her, examining Hermione with intrigue. What is your deal, Miss Granger? Robestan asked over the top of his wine glass. The majority of those in attendance tonight had yet to say a word to her or anyone else, but it seemed that Robestan had been elected as an unofficial jury of those silent. What do you mean? Hermione glanced his way. I mean, you come from the Order. You have no problems, it seems, with killing, even those on the same supposed side as you. You sit pretending to be just another innocent little girl, but I don't buy it. Hermione sighed. If you get rodents in your house, you don't allow them to continue existing there. You get an exterminator and wipe the fuckers out. And I don't think I've claimed, even once since coming here, to be innocent. I am just a girl. She responded, her lips tugging upwards slightly in the corners as her eyes clashed with the Lestrange brother. I do not believe you. Robestan whispered back purposely and slowly across the table. You can believe what you like. At the end of the day, times are changing, plans are changing. Either get on board or get out, Adrian drawled, his fingers picking at his napkin on his dinner plate. There's no getting out, Hermione corrected. If you're not on board, then you're dead. And if you think for a second I won't know, think again. The sound of dripping and several horrified gasps pulled her attention toward the man at the end of the table. Thick black veins spread up his skin from under his shirt's collar. Foamy blood had begun to spill from the wizard's mouth, and tracks of it ran from his eyes. Tiberius gasped for breath, only to choke on the blood spilling from him. On either side of her, her teammates went rigid. Is that... Pansy's voice trailed off in horror. Hermione hummed her agreement. Yes, I tried my best to recreate it, but of course, without your recipe, Tiberius. It was just an estimated guess. How did I do? She asked the wizard at the end of the table rhetorically. His mouth was open in silent screams, blood spilling all over his front. His ears and his nose both had streams of crimson flowing from them now, too. What are you talking about? Draco whispered, his eyes glued to Theo's father's body, his face pale. No doubt the poor man was reliving her own experience with the poison that had very nearly killed her right in front of him. See, I thought it was a bit odd that the Order would use a poison like that. It was hardly their MO. I went over all the notes from Pansy's attempts to find the curse, and I realized that it was dark magic. Old magic. Magic that the precious Order would never have come up with on their own because, first of all, they are too stupid, and second of all, it would go against all their hypocritical bullshit they have been spouting for years, even in the name of removing me as a threat. Tiberius' skin was turning a translucent shade of white, and she had to admit, the way his eyes were bulging and soaked in the blood from his veins was rather gruesome, so she could see why Draco and the others hadn't wanted to talk about it. So, then I started looking into it a little bit further, and I realized there were traces of things I recognized. Elements that are the same as something I've seen before, in a different variation, of course. As yours was a much milder, much more basic strain because you are also stupid, aren't you, Tiberius? Hermione glared over at the man and felt the weight of all her rage building. The funny thing was that he had unknowingly helped her. It was possible that she would never have made those connections if not for his idiocy. Your ancestors were smarter than you. They knew how to make it stick, to pass it down throughout generations. You, on the other hand, couldn't even make it stick enough for one person. Oh my God. Astoria jumped to her feet, knocking the table, causing the cutlery to clatter against the glassware. Her eyes widened in disbelief as the implications of what Hermione was saying had clicked in her brain. Her eyes unfocused on the wall on the other side of the room, lost in her thoughts. Hermione watched as the realization dawned on Theo and Daphne first. The brunette whispered, whipping around to look at her in horror and shock, his mouth wide open and a frown on his face. One by one, her housemates came to the same conclusion. I mean, I really should thank you, Tibby. Without you sending that poison to Seamus, things might have been a lot different. You really streamlined the process for me. Hermione chuckled into her wine glass with a slight shake of her head, pausing with the glass millimeters from her lips. Even in death, you are a failure. Funny that. Tiberius was drenched in his blood. It was everywhere. The pool of it leaked outward along the floor under his body, thick and red and staining Tom's floor. But for once, Blaise seemed unbothered by it. He was just staring at Tiberius' slowly dying body, as everyone was. Every person here had been shocked speechless at Hermione's discoveries tonight. Hermione had, of course, sped up the poison's attack on the wizard's body when recreating the potion herself. She didn't have all night for it to drag out, so she sighed happily when the bastard finally exhaled his last gurgly breath. Right, shall we eat? Hermione asked, turning to Tom expectantly. Once more, everyone turned to her with open mouths and wide eyes and not a word between them. Food appeared on the plates before them, filling the air with the delicious smells of roast vegetables and beef Wellington. Hermione snorted in amusement that food had appeared on Tiberius's dirty plate, after all. It seemed a shame that it would go to waste as his body remained where it was, limp and empty now, unable to enjoy the meal before him. This looks delicious, Tom, thank you. Hermione praised before cutting a potato and popping it into her mouth. A pleased hum vibrating through her at the taste was the loudest thing in the silence.